Good afternoon. As you're aware, I made a decision this morning to step down as the leader of the Republican Caucus in the Senate. I'm actually still Majority Leader until we have another session, and then both the Republicans and the Democrats pick a new leader. But it's something I've been thinking about for a while. One of the radio programs in town asked me, am I leaning to run for governor or not run for governor? And he trapped me, and I said I'm leaning towards running for governor, and so that hasn't changed. I certainly want to get through the fair. I just feel like this is a perfect opportunity to really talk to all the people from Minnesota, from all over Minnesota, and just really have a sense of what they think, what's important to them. And so before I make any other decision besides stepping down, I just want to finish the fair, and then I'll make a decision sometime pretty quick after that. And so with that, I'll take any questions on anything, but here I am.
So you have a campaign logo for governor. So where's the governor campaign?
So Theo said, do I have a campaign logo for governor? Is it, there was one that came out a week or two ago or whatever it was, but that wasn't really the campaign logo. But certainly, we are looking at all of the different things that you have to think about if you're actually going to think about running for governor. It's not an easy task, and to unseat an incumbent is a big deal. I will tell you that there's a number of Republican candidates that have come forth. I think all of them will be good candidates, so if I enter the race, then I will be competing against them first.
Senator, when you say that you'll be majority leader until there's another session, that could include a special session, right?
Yes, so if there's a special session, which is what I hope happens for the $250 million of frontline worker bonuses, at that point, my expectation is that the Democrats and the Republicans would pick a new leader. They don't have to, but it's my expectation that they would.
Some senators have said you could do it between sessions. Is that not right? Do you have to be in session?
Not that I'm aware of. It was my understanding that it would have to be during session, but either way, I'm okay. I just feel like if I'm going to start walking towards one direction, it's really hard to do two directions. And at this point, the Senate Republicans are really in strong shape as far as what we've raised for money and who we have that's looking for leadership. And I'm not worried about passing the baton. I thought it was going to work 10 years in the Senate. I'll have worked 12 by the time I'm done.
Senator Gazelka, what about the timing today? Your colleague was announcing for governor this morning. She knows that. She's here at the fair. You're here at the fair. Is this a sign that this is going to be a real bare-knuckled race?
So the question is, what about the timing? And Senator Benson, first of all, I called Senator Benson last night to let her know I was going to do this, but I started working on the email that many of you saw around 3 days ago, and I don't think there was any news about Senator Benson announcing that she was going to run that I'm aware of. And so the timing was that we were both going to do it, so I thought I'd give her a call out of courtesy and tell her that I was going to be doing it.
In terms of potential replacements for you as majority leader, I understand potentially Jeremy Miller is running, Tom Bach, Bill Weber, and that you had a preferred candidate in Senator Jasinski. Could you talk a little bit about whether any of those people are interested in running for majority leader, and whether you have a preferred candidate?
Do I have a preferred candidate? I've never ever said I had a preferred candidate. Senator John Jasinski is a quality senator, but whoever reported that was my preferred candidate, that would not be true. I'm staying neutral on that. There are 5 or so people I think that are capable of doing the job, that may want to do the job, but that's what a caucus is about. It ends up being a closed session where people make their case about why they think they could be the best leader, and may the best person rise up and be selected.
Senator, regardless of whether you run for governor or not, is the main theme of a successful Republican campaign going to be economic issues, which you largely touted in your email this morning, or as a referendum on how Governor Walz handled the pandemic?
Actually, I don't think it's either one. I think the main issue will be public safety and how the governor did not handle public safety well, did not bring out the guard at an early time, but waited days and days and days. I was so frustrated with that, I actually called the White House to ask for help on a Friday. George Floyd's death was on Monday. By Friday, with no action, very, very frustrated. And finally on Saturday, that's when the guard came out. That has been something that went across the whole country. And so I think that will be the #1 issue. People are frustrated. They don't feel like their streets are safe. and they don't feel like their kids can play outside. That has to change, and so that'll be an issue that I think we all have to address. When the Minneapolis police are started at about 800 and now they're down to about 500 and can barely do 911 calls, we have a problem. And so we're open to public safety reform, but more importantly, we need more police on the streets with the tools they need now.
Hearing to fairgoers. So on Commissioner Dan Malcolm in any special session, any plans like that?
So there are some senators that have publicly recently said that they want to remove Commissioner Malcolm. That is a conversation that we have not yet had in our Senate caucus, but there is some frustration about that related to the vaccination, forcing vaccinations. Me personally, I had COVID. I've been vaccinated. I think people should get vaccinated, but I don't think we should mandate people get vaccinated. I think that's the part where people are frustrated, where they're being forced to do it. I think we're going to get there. Like I said, more and more people are getting vaccinated, but I don't think you should have to. And so we'll see about the commissioner, but there is some real frustration everywhere.
Is that frustration enough to lead to a possible vote on her confirmation?
Those are always tricky. It isn't a one-person decision. Frankly, it's a decision that generally is about 34, and we've not had that conversation.
What about race for your replacement again? Tell me about the concept of Senator Bach, former Democrat caucusing with you. Is there a chance he could run and win in your caucus?
So that will be decided by the caucus. Senator Bach and Senator Tomassoni now align with us. They were in every one of our caucuses. We didn't hold any secrets back from them. They care about the range. I'm from the range, so it was actually really a good fit. And so we'll see. That will be caucus discussion. It's never happened before, but they have been very powerful allies in what we do in the Senate.
What are you hearing from fairgoers when you're talking to them, and are they backing, wanting you to run? What kind of feedback are you getting?
Yeah, I get a lot of people saying you really need to run. It's really time for Governor Walz to go, and they think that I can do it, and that's I'm grateful that people think that. That certainly is something that makes me think about whether I should run or not. For the last 30 days, I've traveled all out throughout Minnesota, north, south, east, west, into Minneapolis, everywhere. And it's been, some of the themes are the same. And like I said, one theme throughout all of them is public safety. Certainly the economy is a big deal as far as making sure that the employer and the employee are both prospering. I think that's a big deal. The public school system and whether they're going to close down the schools again. People are very frustrated with the fact that their kids fell way behind last time, and we said that kids needed to be in school, and other states had their public schools, kids in school, or parochial schools, kids were in school, so why were they not here? And as a result, the results are really, really bad. And so we'll talk about that. I think every kid wants a great education. I think every parent wants to make sure that if their school is not giving them that, they have a choice to go somewhere else. And so that's a conversation we've been having for about 3 years. It's an area that Governor Walz disagrees with us, and we're just going to keep making the case.
Could you continue on as majority leader and run for governor? Why is it an either or?
So the question is, why can't I do both, be majority leader, and if I was to run for governor, why do both? Or why shouldn't I do both? Other people have done that in the past. I don't feel like I can do two things like that excellent. I think I can do one thing excellent, and so I don't think I would do a service of the Senate Republicans if I chose that route to keep hanging on to the power there. It's in the best interest of Republicans that I pick one or the other.
Given the party's weakened state as a statewide party, if you do run, would you abide by the party's endorsement, or do you think it's something that go all the way to the primary?
So the question was, given the party's weakened state, would I abide by the endorsing process? Well, let me take that in two steps. Like I said, I've traveled everywhere, and very few people talk about the state party. They talk about the governor, they talk about who's going to challenge him, they talk about Afghanistan, they talk about the southern border. They don't talk about who the state party chair is, either Democrat or Republican. So I don't see that as a real issue as far as that goes. But what's the second part?
Would you take it all the way to the primary?
So So for me personally, I think I've always said if you can't convince your party that you're the candidate, then you should just step aside. So the endorsing process to me is very, very important. That's what I would do if I make that decision.
How important is Trump's endorsement in Minnesota?
The question is how important is Trump's endorsement in Minnesota? Well, Trump got 45% in Minnesota, and so to win in Minnesota, you have 50%. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know if he'll weigh in or not. We will see.
The frontline worker pay working group recommendations are due out next week. So then there would be a special session. If the governor asks that you agree not to fire any commissioners, is that an agreement you'd be willing to consider to get that frontline money out?
So whoever the leader is will decide. When you're going to have a special session, the 4 leaders typically agree with the governor about what is going to be in the special session. So that's where the rub is. That's a really good question. We have not approached that. No, none of the leaders have talked about that yet.
You will as a candidate for caucus leader if you do run?
No, I will not.
What's Tom Bach's interest in that, if any?
Say that again?
What is Tom Bach's interest in that position, if any?
So they asked this once before, but yeah, no, it's all right. But Tom Bach, depending on the direction, could potentially be a candidate for the leader. Really is determined by the caucus, and we'll see. They have been valuable partners, both Bach and Tomassoni, and have really stood up for the range, which we do as well, and so we'll see.
Does this mean you will not run for re-election to the Minnesota Senate?
Yes. The question is, would I run for re-election for the Senate? And assuming that I'm not going to run for re-election either way. Let's just say that.
So what's going to be your final push to say I'm running for governor? What are you waiting for?
Stay tuned.
All right.
All right, everyone. Thank you for coming out.